Welcome. Happy Martin Luther King Day weekend. I think that we should also name this Happy Tenacity and Resilience Weekend, because yes, not only is tenacity and resilience the name of this amazing Jerry Pinkney exhibition, it really speaks to what we're all doing here. It speaks to the celebration that we begin this evening and continue on as we think about, what's possible. Let me introduce our panelists. Furthest down, Andrew P. Jackson. Hello, Andrew. You are the professor of Black Studies in the York College History, Philosophy, and Anthropology Department. You've also served as a professor of library science at Queens College Graduate School of Library and Information Studies. You are Director Emeritus for the Queens Library's Langston Hughes Community Library and Cultural Center. And upon retirement, you do not look that old, my brother, you were appointed to the Board of Trustees of Queens Public Library, now serving in your second term. You are also a past president of the Black Caucus of the American Library Association. Andrew, it is an honor and a pleasure to have you with us this evening. Thanks for joining us. Mollie Welsh Kruger. Mollie, you're on the graduate faculty of Bank Street College of Education in the Reading and Literacy Program and co-chair of the Children's Book Committee. You've been an early childhood and elementary school teacher in New York City for over 20 years. God bless you. While working on your doctorate, you became engaged in deeper conversations about literacy, children's literature, and its impact. We are going to come back to that. But for now, Mollie, we are so glad to have you here, Mollie Welsh Kruger. And last but certainly not least, Jesse Bourdon. Jesse, you're the director of the Croton Free Library. You've worked in various facets of libraries for more than 20 years, and you have an extensive background in graphic design and 3D modeling. And Jesse, I am going to just begin with you. You have worked in a very hands-on capacity with Jerry Pinkney. You served as his tech and administrative deputy. He spoke about you many times. Call Jesse. Jesse will do it. Jesse can handle it. You really saw a lot of the day-to-day inner workings of how Jerry did what he did. Very few people got to see the artistry happening as it was happening. Can you give us a brief snapshot? How did you meet Jerry Pinkney? And speaking as a library professional and parent, talk to us about the themes in Jerry's work and how these themes have helped open up conversations with young people about social justice, about racial equality.
I started working with him, I'd say it was around 2007, 2008. He had come into the library, and at the time I was kind of the all-around, help out, process books. Pretty much anyone asks about anything involving computers, they're going to call my name. I'm going to go help the person. And we just had this nice patron come to our reference desk, and he was looking for someone to help him, with my email, website, stuff like that. I could use some help around there. So immediately the librarian said, "Hey, Jesse, this guy needs you." So I walk up, and unfortunately I rolled my eyes because it's not the first time I've been asked to do this, and I sat down and sure enough listened to what this person was interested in, and I knew Jerry's work, but I didn't know Jerry. So I knew I knew his work, I knew his name, but it didn't connect. All I saw was a patron up there that needed help, and I was like, okay, what is it you're looking for help with? And he told me, and someone was like, "You should really help him out. I mean, he's pretty good at doing this stuff." And I was like, you know what the heck, I'll go. So I pretty much said, yes, very nice guy, yeah, don't worry, just come by, this and that. We made the plan. A couple of days later, I go up there. In the meantime, I read up on who I was meeting with, and I probably shouldn't have done that, because I immediately walked in. I was like, "Hey, how are you doing? What can I do? What do you need? Anything?" He's just like, "No." And pretty much from there, we started a relationship. I kind of bridged him into, I guess, modern presentations and stuff. He handed me a big circular contraption, said, "This is my presentation. These are slides. I need to show it, but they said something about PowerPoint, and I don't know how to turn this into PowerPoint." And that's how kind of our relationship started. So, we set him up with email, started working on his website, started turning all his presentations into PowerPoint, and that was pretty much how our relationship started. Every time he had a new showing, we did that, and because I worked in the library and had the background, he had me organize all his artwork too. So I do apologize ahead of time on the museum staff. My fingerprint's probably on a lot of this work. If it, anything predates 2010, I remember being down there and organizing a lot of the work for shows and everything like that. So that was kind of how we met and started working together. And from speaking on behalf of the whole Croton Free Library, we were his home library. Every time he had a mock-up of a new book coming out, he'd walk right into the library. He's all excited. He's like, does anyone want to see it? The entire staff goes around. We get the table. No one cares about that we're a library trying to help people or that we're supposed to be quiet. And we all sit down at the main table. He starts going through. We're oohing and ahhing through the whole thing. And this is something that's not even going to, hit the printers for another 3 months, and we get to see the whole thing fully narrated, explained. He tells us each page, his process behind it. And I mean, if you were just walking the library that day, he would have talked to you like you were a staff member too. He would have showed you everything. It didn't matter. He loved to share everything. He giggled through the whole process, showing every piece and the story behind it. And that was what we were honored with, getting to enjoy every single time that he was working on a piece, that we got to see it while he was working on it. I got to watch him while he was doing just the sketching alone, and that was by far, I just love to walk in, just hear about what he's working on, and and I'd say early on I worked a lot more, going frequently, visiting him and getting to see the progress. It was impressive. And the way his work kind of translates, I guess, from a social justice, platform, I guess the way Jerry saw every single character in one of his books as like kind of a story to tell. It didn't matter the color of the person, or if it was a person or an animal or whatever. He felt that was going to be his voice in that book on how he was going to get his point across, get his moral across. You could sit there and talk to him about it and ask, he's like, I kind of like that. He'd giggle about it. You would think, oh, he's just, drawing this picture. And then you read how that character interacts in the story, whether it was something that he was adapting from someone else. And you could tell the amount, the theme, what he was trying to convey, the moral of the story, the process, what that character learns. That's what he was that's how he spoke to everyone. That was how he got his word across. Because when you talk, he had a bunch of opinions, but his voice really came out, I'd say, more in the characters that he was adapting, drawing, and that's how you kind of learn through that. And the things that he taught or wanted to teach or have an opinion on, that's kind of how I feel that he kind of shared that with everyone.
Right, that visual storytelling. You Jesse, are a fairy god librarian. You came, you swooped in, and again, you got to see so much of the portfolio as it was, being shaped in a lot of these books, and absolutely tremendous. Thank you. Andrew, so as someone who served within the Black librarian community for decades, give us a little historical context on Black literature for children and where Jerry Pinkney's work fits in.
When I thought about the comments I wanted to make, I looked at it from two perspectives. One, as a librarian, and then two, as an elder. I turned 76 at the end of this month, so I go back to my childhood and connecting this to Black children's literature, but also illustrations of myself and my family and others in our books. And I go back to the Harlem Renaissance period. That we looked at two statements by Carter G. Woodson and the other by Langston Hughes that are almost like platforms for the development of the generation of illustrators and authors that come out into the 1950s and 60s with Langston Hughes. Carter G. Woodson once said, if a race has no history, if it has no worthwhile traditions, it becomes a negligible factor in the thought of the world and stands in danger of being exterminated. And I always share that with my students when I'm teaching. Langston Hughes wrote in his 1926 manifesto for the New Negro during the Harlem Renaissance, during an essay he wrote entitled The Negro Artist and Racial Mountain. We younger Negro artists who create now intend to express our individual dark-skinned selves without fear or shame. We build our temples for tomorrow strong as we know how, and we stand on top of the mountain free within ourselves. And that freedom opened the door for not only Jerry, but the first black illustrator that I met, Elton Fax, who lived in Queens and spent almost every day when he was wandering around the neighborhood, he would come into Langston's library and just be part of the fabric of the library. He'd sit with the children, he'd sit with fledgling artists and help them with their portfolios. He'd conduct workshops, he illustrated his work. And at the library, it was the first place that I really saw the images of positive images of black people illustrated around the walls. Elton's work was around the walls. But I remembered that historically, that has never been the case prior to that in the early 19th century and even early 20th century. That the images that we grew up with were mostly in children's books, animals, which I think is beautiful because of what Jerry and other artists have done with the storylines of using animals and fish and animals in the sea and animals in the forest to illustrate stories. And that quite often, a lot of the children's storybooks that even many of you would probably remember were not with images of people, but they were images of animals, and the stories were told through the eyes and the souls of animals. When you did see faces, you saw white faces, you didn't see black faces until A Snowy Day was done around 1957, 1959.
62.
62, okay, so I'm almost right. And that little image of the little black face on the cover was more of a smudge than a real illustration of a child's face. But that was the beginning of a new generation. And then when you got to start to see the illustrations coming out and the door opening as a result of the Harlem Renaissance of opportunities for artists to create work that was acceptable and being promoted. Authors being able to write, whether it was Langston Hughes plays or poetry or serving as journalists or writing children's stories, young adult stories, adult stories. You started to see that door open with the acceptability of works and narrations and images and the souls of black folks through the eyes of W.B. Du Bois and all the others. That generation started to change, and out of that you got Tom Feelings and John Steptoe, Jerry Pinkney, Elton Fax, and many others, Carol Bayard, Camille Yarbrough. All of these people started to put books out. And then I remember the first book that I saw published was Camille Yarbrough's Cornrows, that not only had images on the cover, but celebrated black hair, and that was a change in life. You can't leave out George Ford and the books that he created, and then seeing the images of majestic images of black people on the covers of books like that. And then Tom Feelings, who traveled across the world creating sketches of black children around the world and showed the similarities and the beauty of black skin on the covers of books. And then, of course, Jerry, the first book that I ever really enamored to of Jerry's was the Old African. And the images that are in this book and the storyline told from a perspective of an African, which was also something that was new coming out of the Harlem Renaissance with people like Marcus Garvey and Langston Hughes using the term Negro and African and black all interchangeably. And the need for, as we see in libraries, children coming into the libraries. And I thought about it this morning this afternoon we arrived, there were two little children that came into the room where the video was being showed with Jerry narrating. And the spark in their eyes when they saw these beautiful color images of the fish and the turtle and the tortoise and the hare, that majestic image and that curiosity in the eyes of children. When I would go into the library, the first place I take people when they want to find something about somebody would be the children's room. I want to take the children's biography and the children's stories and then go from there and go to the research to come into the encyclopedias and the atlases and all the historical reference books to create stories. But that children's room, when you see children of multicultural hues coming into the library, you want them to be able to see not just white faces, I want them to see all faces. And we would constantly put displays up of all the different children's books and all the beautiful art.
You know, it's like I always say, kids see what they see and they don't see what they don't see.
Yes.
So they see if we show them the covers, and if, you know, they don't see what we don't show them.
Yes, as Mary Wright Edelman said, you can't be what you can't see.
Right, exactly.
Kadir Nelson, one of the
yes, right.
current illustrators, and the beautiful, I remember when this first came out, I gave this out to people as a Kwanzaa gift of like maybe 20 people, just so they could see the beauty
Right.
on the covers of books and the storylines about black people. And I think that history continues on now with our young librarians. I got a book yesterday from a young librarian who creates his own books about a little character named Rodney in the library.
Right, that's
Who grows
adorable.
up wanting to be a librarian? I served it 36 years
Right,
as a librarian.
exactly.
That's not one of the professions.
And you know, really, you know, Jerry was kind of at the forefront of
Now you have
that.
stories encouraging young black boys to grow up and be librarians.
Yeah.
So that history travels with us and shows the progress and the change and the modification of what happens with beauty and acceptance and reality of what this America really looks like.
Right.
That's special.
Yeah, Jerry, you know, was kind of at the front of that parade. You know, I always say, like, so there were people ushering in images that were kind of representative, which was important, but, you know, Jerry Pinkney, I always believe, you know, he gave us the black experience.
Yes.
And made it very experiential for people who are black and not. You know, he got us in, you know, with Patchwork Quilt, he showed us the mother's hands, that loving relationship, a living room, a family.
One of the other beauties about Jerry that I can remember, and you may not remember this, we were leaving an ALA conference in Atlanta. I told you about this once before. And then going to the airport, you were coming back to New York with Jerry, I was coming back to New York, and you were sitting with Jerry, and I came up and we sat together and talked. And Jerry brought out his sketches. And I can't remember which book it was, but as he did with you, he would sit down and talk about it and get my impressions. What were my impressions of his artwork? Elton Fax used to do the same thing. Mm-hmm. Tom Feelings had me come to his studio and do the same thing when he was working on The Middle Passage. Mm-hmm. But the idea that they wanted to know what you thought, not just what they thought it was going to be, but how did you receive it? What was your reaction to it? And that was the things that made that generation of artists very special as well.
Yeah, it's very true. I mean, that was very true of Jerry. You know, kind of like the idea of my art is your art. You know, this is ours. This is we, us, and ours. Mollie, if I'm a parent of a 3 to 5 year old, you know, how do we, or a caregiver, or I know a child, I have a child in my life, how can we instill even the youngest readers with messages about social justice? How do we enter into those conversations? And, you know, again, always bringing it back to Jerry's work, and the works are really so many, as you so brilliantly pointed out, Andrew, so many creators. You know, how have these helped inform all of that?
Where to begin? I think begin with Jerry. The book Minty was in my 2nd grade classroom. Found that book, examined it, thought about my 2nd graders, 7, 8-year-olds, found a poem by Eloise Greenfield about Harriet Tubman, brought it together with a few other titles, and built a unit of study that with 2nd graders were exploring a woman who led people toward North and freedom. So much so that we went and saw the statue of Harriet Tubman and had heard the artist was upset because it had not been placed facing north, and the students were like, but she kept going back. And these 2nd graders were making more of history than some folks who maybe were more their age. We know that children in the age groups 3 to 5 already are so curious about their world. By the way, isn't that Jerry? Be curious. It's a part of a really famed quote that I love that he reminds us, right? To go forward, learn, try, maybe make mistakes, don't let it stop you. And so with our 3 to 5-year-olds, they're trying to make sense of their world. They want to know. At Bank Street, our foundress, Lucy Sprague Mitchell, talks about the here and now. Children want to know they're here here and they're now, but they become very curious about the world at large and how the now came to be. Often people think the children, even at the age of 1, are already not doing this work. They are. They're already thinking. When it comes to race, before the age of 1, children are thinking about what they see and what they make sense of. It makes me, if I can go to Rudine Sims Bishop, thinking about the windows and mirrors and sliding glass doors that books can be for children at these ages. We know at all ages, right? But I'm going to say it again later, but at birth, it starts at birth. We don't wait to 3 to 5. We start thinking about how we open up a book and let a child explore it. And all these images around these rooms are just a beginning for children in that age. And you also mentioned the talk, and it's having conversations. What do you think? What's in there for us, right?
Right, it's so true. And it's the beauty of picture books. You know, we can open up a conversation. We can sit, you know, and have that lap time, you know, have that cuddle moment and say, what's going on in the picture? What do you think? All of that. So absolutely. Jesse, you're interfacing with library patrons constantly. You have people coming in with a multitude of backgrounds and interests. How has encountering stories that might be different from one's experience affected a person? So I come in, I get a book by Jerry Pinkney or someone, and it really has, you know, little to do, I think, with my experience. How does that affect me as a young person, as a reader, as a parent?
That's a lot to.
It's a complex
Yeah, no,
one, I
it's
know.
so I try to think of, and you know, I had more time working with kids when I had more time sitting at the desk. Now a lot of it now is with my own kids and Jerry's work. My kids refer to Jerry as just my friend. Oh, your friend that wrote that book. Your friend that wrote, because that's pretty much what he became. So you know, I think down the line they'll learn to understand to the level of who my friend is. But I think what I find most interesting about kind of, and it's kind of speaking to what I said a little earlier on it, is that Jerry he brought more life to all the characters in the story. So in a sense, so I'll use, I guess, 3 Billy Goats Gruff is a good example. So you have a story that has a moral to it. It's that Billy Goats go across, troll, and all that. Jerry saw more to it than that. He wanted to have a reason behind the troll, too. He wanted to tell a story behind the troll and the goats and ways that they can possibly work together. There's something to it that no matter, and this is kind of speaking more to Jerry's stuff, when there is so many more layers to the stories, that whether he is the way he adapted the story or the way just the artwork kind of conveys it, that it isn't just a black and white story, just saying this is it, this is what happens, this is done. There is a background to it and all that stuff. And what I try to teach other people is that, you know, I sound so cliche, just don't judge a book by its cover, but if I'm going to go to 3 Billy Goats Gruff, don't grab Jerry's edition of 3 Billy Goats Gruff and think you know exactly how the story goes, how that story ends. And the way he'll take a lot of different stories, there is a complexity to it. There is more to learn from it. And, you know, speaking to, you know, I know his work more of his, let's just say his more modern work, you know, the 90s on and stuff like that. When you see this star, the focus of it being a black child, you don't say, oh, that's a story about a black child. It's a story about a child. That's it. And that's the thing, is he normalized it. He said, like, so a child can walk in and it's not only in February you're going to see Jerry's books on display. Like, that's the type of thing that's very important about it, is that you're going to pick it up because if you're reading about fairy tales, some of Jerry's work's going to go in there. If you're reading about a child and their experience, whether it's a holiday story, you're doing Christmas boot, you're not only seeing his work when you're learning about, you know, social justice or the black experience. You're reading about it when you're reading about a kid doing something. And I think that's the most important thing, is that what I notice, and it's not just his work, but I did notice while like learning his work, I go, oh, I remember reading this because I was searching this, not because it was February, because I was asked to read it because this is why. And I think that was one of the things, and I'm not saying he's the only artist to do this, but he made it mainstream, that it didn't matter boy or a girl, fish, lion, whatever, it doesn't matter, whatever the animal or creature that was going to do, they were going to learn the story. They were going to tell you the story. You were going to learn through them. And I think that was something that was very important, that you didn't, his work's everywhere. It's everywhere, and you can use it for anything. It doesn't have a certain place that then you go to it and grab it.
It's very true. Beauty is beauty is beauty, you know, especially in the hands of Jerry Pinkney, who really, as Michelle, I believe, said, was the creator of more than 100. I mean, like, wrap your head around that. You know, 100 beloved and best-selling and award-winning children's books. He cared deeply about the impact of social justice on young people and also the universal messages of family and beauty and self-empowerment and agency. Here we are in Martin Luther King weekend. His book, A Place to Land, Martin Luther King Jr. and the Speech That Inspired a Nation, written by Barry Wittenstein. This is the story behind one of the most celebrated speeches in American history, really in the world. The notable Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech. Barry Wittenstein is here with us this evening. Barry, again, just a pleasure. Thank you for joining us. So, A Place to Land. So on the night before the historic moment, before the March on Washington, Martin Luther King Jr., he debated, he discussed, he worked, he wrote late into the night, trying to decide what he was going to say and how to say it. You know, he was really sweating it out. And, you know, this book really pays homage to that. You know, it's this little-known story that celebrates this famous speech, but also the influences of many civil rights pioneers who helped Martin Luther King Jr. shape those words. So here we are shaping. We're framing historical events, figures, notable stories for young people. Andrew, how do books shape modern activism?
One of the things that I enjoy about working at the library is the fact that you can take a children's book and make that even more realistic to today's generation. Because I look at teaching Black studies, I look at my students in the first day of class and said, you are the products of the civil rights struggle. But they were, and the civil rights struggle to them is recent ancient history. They weren't alive when it happened. They only heard about Martin Luther King. They only read about Malcolm X. They only saw stories about Rosa Parks. But their introduction historically in the classroom is fairly limited. Those are the three characters they know most about. And some of the information they know about them is even limited. So if you take a book like this book, and you can introduce I Have a Dream speech to them and what the March on Washington was about through this book, it creates images. The textbook is nothing but a lot of narrative on paper, a lot of words on paper, and many of them aren't reading that. So they don't really get that history. But when you can show them the illustrations and the images from this book, and then tie that into what your textbook has a whole different meaning. And then they can interpret it themselves, what they can visualize, since they didn't live through it. They didn't come home in the afternoon and see it on television like I did. They didn't march like I did. They weren't part of the demonstrations like I was. They could only hear about it. But this and the ideals that come out of the illustration and the richness and the beauty of the illustrations, and that phrase from Mahalia Jackson, Martin, tell them about the dream. Yeah. That has a whole different connotation than just reading it from a historical textbook or listening to it from a professor in front of a classroom.
Right, yeah. You know, we really have to reel it back for them. They almost can't believe it. You know, I love, you know, when I talk to fourth graders, you know, they're like, so did you experience discrimination? Like, I'm like, do you have a minute, kid? You know, like, it's like, you know, they're like, they just can't, you know, and I say, you could not sit next to your white friend or your black friend in the same class. They just, so these books kind of bring it front and center. Mollie and everybody, you know, what is the future of storytelling as an avenue for education, social justice?
I just want to echo Jesse's story and how Jerry was so masterful. And you talked earlier about character, but for me, there's a real resounding how he brings the story forward. He wants us all to flip the pages with him and come forward. And I also just wanted to jump in, because I knew we were going to be together. I got together with 2 second grade classrooms in the Bronx this week and read A Place to Land to them. And it was so fascinating to see 7 and 8-year-olds. And I don't know if you remember, but Jerry's put in the faces of the folks that come before. And so there's these images all around Dr. King when he's writing the speech, you know, and I was reading the names and I thought to myself, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't, like, these are names what will they mean to them? And I left one out, and one of the children said, you missed that one. because they were listening, because they were hearing. And so in the short storytelling, though, it's also the details. The kids also picked up on the "We shall overcome." Jerry brought the lyrics through the book in collage, and they just kind of like were following these pieces of music that then came into the story. So we ended up singing, of course, my friends. So
A shout out to visual storytelling, and Jerry's strength with that. And I think that was part of his dyslexia, which he, was very outspoken about and very vocal, that if a child never looks at a word, sorry, Barry, if a child, if a child is struggling to read, Jerry will open the door visually, and then they read, Barry Wittenstein's wonderful words. Call to action. You talked, Andrew, about, the future and young people today. What can we all do right now? We all believe in it. We all believe in equality, social justice, equity, and all of that, but how do we practice it? How can we become practitioners of social justice? How do we become actionable agents of tenacity and resilience? How do we become stewards of Jerry Pinkney's legacy and impact? So if we leave here tonight, what can we do? If we wake up tomorrow morning, if we wake up on Martin Luther King Day and we say, I'm going to do fill in the blank.
One of my solutions to everybody is to give books to children when they're born. Don't wait till they go to school.
yes.
Yeah.
Give books to children with folk tales and stories and all these beautiful images so that they grow up seeing America as it really is and not as they keep hearing about it and what it is turning out to be with all the confusion going on today. Every time you give them a gift for anything, give them a book.
Right.
So that what you're doing, and I've done this with my great niece. When she was born, my triplet sister, my triplet sister brought my niece to New York for the first time from California in a bassinet. And I gave her a book of children's folk tales, African folk tales then. She now has a library because every time I gave her a gift for anything, she got books. So she has her own library at home. Not that I don't want her to use the public library. But there are times when you want them to sit down and read, and those things are right at their fingertips, so that they can see these beautiful images. They can learn about King, they can learn about Minty, and they can read these things and see the visualization and the images. No matter what their culture is, all of the books in the house should be multicultural to represent the world as we know it and as it is. Books are going to be that passport and that special place that they can go to every time they want to open a book.
Right. The first thing a child does when they're born is they see. They open their eyes, And I'm going to spout a quick statistic which may be helpful to people. So the American Academy of Pediatrics says that if you read to a child from the moment they are born, they have a greater chance of being lifelong readers and having a better success rate in school. And this study also showed that reading to infants improves their health. It's medically prescribed that we read to our young people. So there you go.
The supplement to that also is, don't just give them the book, sit down and
Exactly.
read the book with
exactly.
them.
Yes.
Especially you guys in the audiences. Too many young boys don't think that men read. It's not cool. Mothers usually read stories. Dads, sit down and read to your sons, read to your daughters. Read books, give them books, but also read the books with them.
Right.
Well, read aloud, read aloud, read aloud, definitely.
That's right.
Appreciating that. Also just thinking about encouraging kids to have the time with the books also. Sometimes people think when children are turning the pages and they're not reading the words on the page, ooh, there I am with the words again, but that they are telling the stories, right? They're taking in what's happening there and bringing it forward. So yes for read aloud, and yes for recognizing that those are steps. It's all part of the reading process.
Yeah.
As his local library director, I'd say he would tell everyone, go to your library. So use your library. Because, realistically, not just for the books. There are programs there, and right now libraries are under attack sometimes for some of the programs that they do and stuff like that. So it's one of your last, in a sense, safe spaces, community organizing spaces. So I'm doing Jerry's work by even just pushing on how important the library is. But kind of something everyone can do is also find your voice. I think that was one of the things, is Jerry's voice was his art. That's how he spoke. I mean, he could talk for hours about just about anything. I'm not saying that he only spoke through his artwork, but when he really wanted, he knew that was his outlet to get his point across, to share with others, for other people for everyone to kind of understand what he was trying to say. And I think everyone has the ability to do that. Not everyone is beautiful with watercolors or pastels and collages. Jerry pretty much picked up anything and figured out how to do it. So, but certain people, it's in the way they write. Certain people, it's in the artwork, it's in the music, it's what they do. But everyone has kind of a creative outlet, and that's their way of speaking. I think that we take anything away for, how you could get, engage with others and, support others. It's really finding your voice and being able to do that. I think that's an important thing.
Right, here. Yep, start with that oral tradition and then inspire a child to develop their own. We're winding down. I'd like to say I'm going to open it up for just maybe one or two questions among our panelists, and then we'll wind it down. Yes.
When my children were young, we're talking many years ago, the worst thing we could ever say to them if they were misbehaving, you better straighten out or you're not getting a book tonight. That was the most powerful thing we could do, and it worked. So my question is, you spoke about, two of you spoke about having the privilege to see how Jerry Pinkney, like what his process was, and I would love if you could just mention a little bit, I see drawings, I see, were there photographs involved, and just like, can you speak a little bit more about his artistic process?
So two times I very much remember that he really wanted to get it right. Now it's both in Lion and the Mouse and Sweethearts of Rhythm. Both of them and this is only could be done now with, well, I can't say only could be done now because previously you had libraries, but the research involved with it. So I remember talking with him specifically about, I'm trying to think, in Lion and the Mouse, the conversation actually involved whites in Africa and the Jeeps they drove. So when that Jeep drove by, what type of Jeep are they going to be driving, and finding that type of Jeep? And then what type of trap are they going to be laying for the lion? So then we were looking at knots and types of traps and how to write. So an entire day was spent finding the Jeep and finding the right type of trap that they laid for the lion. Something probably just about anyone reading Lion and the Mouse, and I'm guessing with the Call to Honor doesn't go through how much research went into Lion and the Mouse, but that he wanted to get those right. He did not want that to be taken the wrong way. He wanted to make sure that was right. Even though that just had to do with humans in the world of Lion and the Mouse, he wanted to get that right. And when we were doing Sweethearts of Rhythm, I mean, this was a timepiece. He wanted to make sure the cars were accurate. It wasn't just, I saw a certain picture of the Cotton Club and I copied it. No, we were looking at the types of cars being driven at the time. He was given certain shots of certain cars to decide on what car he wanted to be there too. He really wanted to make sure it was accurate and reflected that. Even if, in the end, that's it. I'm not going to say it had nothing to do with the story, but you'd think he wanted to make it accurate even if it was a kid's picture fiction book. That was where his focus was. And I know previously, a lot of his work, he would hire models, and that's how he did it. Once with the internet around, it was a lot easier to get certain things. He still needed models for when it involved people, but when it involved animals, how they looked, it was a lot easier to either get pictures online or, we're in Croton, we'd go to T-Town, and he would actually sometimes get some of the birds or whatever they had there. They'd let him borrow the stuffed birds so he could use them as reference if he was doing that stuff. It was his attention to detail was very impressive. And the sketches, the ideas, you'll see in some of his, if you see some of his sketches, you'll see notes he'll write to himself, add more emotion here or this and that. He would have to try to really think about what that person was going through or what that animal was going through, and then try multiple sketches on them either being more emotional or less emotional, all depending on the situation. That's a taste of some of the stuff that I observed in my short time.
I think you have to shout out the closet.
Yes,
The closet
right.
outside the studio has got to be shouted out. Double wide, many shelves, open it up, and it's just book after book after book, historical pieces, so that his work would be accurate. It was so important to him. I was looking at God Bless the Child this evening, and I was admiring the fabrics that the people, that they were wearing, and the designs. He just really wanted to get it. And by the way, at the back of the book, he thanks all the historical societies that helped him to get that right, the research, right?
Yeah, texture, authenticity, beauty. You can order a copy of A Place to Land online, or you can get it at your library.